Talent is the favorite story of those who cannot tolerate the truth about control. It tells you that differences are natural, that hierarchies are fixed, that some are made to lead while others are made to observe. It is a comfortable explanation for a system that does not want to be questioned. If talent decides, then willpower is irrelevant. If talent decides, then discipline is optional. And if discipline is optional, then failure can be justified without shame. This belief is not accidental. It is deeply rooted because it serves a precise psychological function. It protects the ego from responsibility. It offers you an elegant excuse for lack of consistency. It allows you to explain stagnation without truly looking at yourself. And most importantly, it keeps you reactive, emotional, predictable. The human mind is built to seek quick signals of value. In ancient tribes, this made sense. Whoever was faster, stronger, more expressive had a higher chance of survival. Visible talent was a signal. But the world no longer functions on short signals. Modern power is not won through bursts of ability. It is won through continuity, through uninterrupted presence, through the ability to remain functional when stimuli disappear. Talent is stimulus. Discipline is infrastructure. Stimuli get exhausted. Infrastructure remains. What you are not told is that talent, in the form in which it is glorified, creates dependence. It conditions you to believe that performance should be easy, that things should flow, that if you don't feel the flow, something is wrong. This expectation becomes a trap, because reality does not offer constant flow. It offers friction. It offers repetition. It offers long stretches of monotony without feedback. That is where the rupture occurs. Talent enters into negotiation with discomfort. Discipline does not negotiate. Most people confuse discipline with hardness, with rigidity, with a form of self-aggression. It is a convenient misunderstanding. If discipline is harsh, then refusing it becomes an act of self-protection. But real discipline is neutral. It does not punish you. It does not reward you. It does not validate you. It only reduces behavioral variation. And the reduction of variation is the beginning of control. A reactive person is easy to read. They react to fatigue, to frustration, to lack of recognition. They change direction based on mood. They justify their pauses through emotions. For those watching from the outside, this type of behavior is transparent. You know when they will quit. You know when they will force unnecessarily. You know when they can be provoked. A disciplined person is opaque, not because they hide something, but because they do not offer relevant emotional signals. Their internal state no longer dictates action. This creates discomfort around them. Because most people operate by reading reactions. When reactions are absent, control shifts. Power does not come from force. It comes from asymmetry, from the fact that you are not playing the same game. Talent pushes you to express yourself. Discipline teaches you to restrain yourself. This restraint is often misinterpreted as a lack of ambition. In reality, it is a lack of urgency. Disciplined people do not rush because they are not pressured by states. They do not need to prove anything right now, because they know that the process, repeated enough times, inevitably produces difference. Inevitability is what frightens the most. When something is inevitable, it can no longer be stopped by emotion. It can no longer be derailed by drama. It can no longer be slowed by confusion. And talent, no matter how spectacular, does not create inevitability. It creates only possibility. And possibility is fragile. Biologically, the brain seeks quick reward. Socially, quick rewards are applauded. Talent offers both. Discipline refuses both. That is why it is rare. Not because it is difficult, but because it is quiet. because it does not offer immediate confirmation, because it does not feed identity. Identity is another exploited mechanism. When you identify with your talent, any failure becomes a personal threat. Any stagnation becomes an insult. You begin to defend yourself, to explain, to look for someone to blame. Discipline breaks this link. You are not what you do. You do what you do because it is programmed to be done. This separation is the beginning of strategic maturity. Those who dominate systems are not the most passionate. They are the most predictable to themselves. They know what they will do tomorrow regardless of how they feel. They know what they will not do regardless of provocation. They have eliminated most emotional decisions from their lives, not through constant willpower, but through structure. Structure beats impulse every time. Talent creates the illusion of control. Discipline creates real control. There is a subtle moment when you begin to notice that the talented are often the easiest to destabilize. Their pride is tied to performance. When performance drops, fear appears. Fear produces reactions. Reactions produce mistakes. It is a simple chain, predictable. That is why in real competitions, it is not the most brilliant who win, but the most consistent. Consistency is not spectacular, but it is devastating in the long term. Discipline does not make you faster, it makes you harder to stop. This difference is not discussed often because it is not attractive, it does not sell well, it does not produce enthusiasm, but it produces stable results. And stability is the real currency of power, not talent, not charisma, not raw intelligence, but the ability to remain functional when others fluctuate. When you understand this, something begins to change, not on the surface, not in visible behaviors, but in the way you look at your own reactions. You begin to see them as noise, as interference, as something that can be observed without being followed. This distance is dangerous for you and for others, because once you no longer react automatically, you can no longer be easily maneuvered. Challenges lose their power, false urgencies dissolve, other people's emotions become information, not command, and information, when processed slowly, creates advantage. Talent does not prepare you for this, discipline does, and this is only the beginning. There is a moment when talent begins to become a burden, not suddenly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost imperceptibly. At first, everything seems to work. Reactions are fast, results appear without visible effort. You receive confirmation, you receive attention, you receive that kind of feedback that tells you you are on the right path. But without realizing it, the mind begins to form a dangerous association. It associates value with ease. It associates progress with pleasure. It associates success with the absence of friction. This association makes you fragile, because the real world does not respect these conditions. It does not offer emotional consistency. It does not offer constant clarity. It does not offer unlimited energy. And when these things are missing, talent no longer knows what to do. Not because it disappears, but because it was never trained to function in their absence. Discipline, by contrast, is built precisely for this void. Those who are not disciplined believe that disciplined people are more motivated, more ambitious, more determined. This is another useful lie. If discipline is the result of some special internal quality, then its absence once again becomes excusable. The truth is more uncomfortable. Discipline does not come from a surplus of willpower. It comes from a reduction of options, from the elimination of internal negotiation. Most people live their lives as a continuous conversation with themselves. What should I do today? How do I feel today? What deserves the effort today? This conversation consumes energy. It creates confusion. It produces delay. Discipline stops the conversation, not through force, through prior decision. When the decision is already made, emotion is left without an executive role. This is where the real shift in power begins. A person who decides in advance is difficult to influence in the present. They do not react to social pressure. They do not react to artificial urgencies. They do not react to emotional provocation. Not because they are immune, but because reaction is no longer a valid option in their internal system. This type of person becomes unsettling to those around them because they break the rhythm, because they do not enter into drama, because they do not confirm expectations. Those who rely on talent and reaction feel this as a vague threat. They cannot explain exactly why. They only know that they cannot control the situation. Control is rarely exercised directly. It is exercised through anticipation, through knowing how someone will react. Talent creates emotional patterns that are easy to anticipate. Pride wants validation, frustration wants release, boredom wants stimulation. All of these are entry points. Discipline closes these points, not completely, but enough. There is a persistent illusion that power belongs to the expressive, to the vocal, to those who dominate the conversation. In reality, these people are often the most exposed. Every reaction is information. Every outburst is a mapped weakness. Every excessive enthusiasm is an open door. Disciplined people speak less not out of shyness, but out of economy. They do not offer unnecessary information. They do not unload their states into the shared space. They do not turn emotion into spectacle. This restraint creates informational asymmetry. And asymmetry creates advantage. Talent loves to be seen. Discipline prefers to be effective. In the short term, talent seems to win. It attracts opportunities. It attracts attention. It attracts support. But each of these things comes with a cost. Expectations, pressure, the need to maintain an image. Discipline does not create an image. It creates functionality, and functionality can be adjusted without crisis. When something does not work, the disciplined person does not ask what this says about them. They ask what it says about the system. And systems can be modified without drama. This lack of drama is often interpreted as a lack of passion. In reality, it is a lack of attachment to the ego. And the ego is the primary point of exploitation in any power dynamic. Whoever needs to be seen can be ignored. Whoever needs to be validated can be delayed. Whoever needs to be appreciated can be manipulated. Discipline reduces these needs to a minimal functional level. It does not eliminate them completely, but it removes them from the position of command. A person who does not need to prove anything is dangerous in a quiet way. Because they are not playing for applause, they are playing for position. And position is built over time, not in spectacular moments. It is built through small decisions, repeated, almost boring. It is built when no one is watching, when reaction would be easier than response. This is where the difference appears between those who have potential and those who become inevitable. Potential is always future. Inevitability is extended present. Those who rely on talent live in an imaginary future, when they will have the right context, when they will be recognized, when they will be motivated. Discipline lives in the repeated present. It does the same thing today because it did it yesterday, and because it will do it tomorrow. Not because it is inspired, but because it is stable. Stability is intimidating, because it cannot be accelerated by others. It cannot be stopped by chaos. It cannot be distracted by emotion. It continues regardless of noise. At some point, you begin to see this clearly, in yourself and in others. You see how much of human behavior is reaction, how much is impulse, How little is real decision. This clarity does not make you superior, it makes you detached. And detachment is a form of power that reactive people cannot access. Because when you are not caught in the emotional flow, you can observe. When you observe, you can anticipate. When you anticipate, you can choose. And choice, not reaction, is the foundation of control. Talent does not teach you to choose. It teaches you to execute when conditions are favorable. Discipline teaches you to choose even when conditions are hostile. This is the difference that begins to feel heavy. Not exciting, not liberating, but serious, like a door closing behind you without a sound. Because once you have seen this, you can no longer fully return to reaction without feeling it as a weakness. Discipline is often presented as a performance tool, a tool for results, a method to do more, better, faster. This presentation is incomplete and intentionally superficial, because the true function of discipline is not productivity. It is psychological dominance, not over others directly, but over the frame in which others are forced to react. Emotional reaction is the basic language of social control, not because it is weak, but because it is universal. People react to rejection, to pressure, to fear, to promise. These reactions can be triggered almost mechanically. That is why they are used. That is why they are cultivated. That is why they are amplified in environments where power must circulate quickly. Discipline interrupts this circuit. A person who does not react as expected destabilizes the entire system around them. They do not raise their voice when they are supposed to. They do not defend themselves when attacked. They do not rush when others become agitated. This behavior is not passive. It is active, but on a different level. It creates dissonance, and dissonance forces adjustment. Reactive people do not know what to do with controlled silence. They interpret it as weakness, or as arrogance, or as lack of interest. They rarely interpret it correctly, because correct interpretation requires accepting the fact that they do not hold control. And that acceptance is difficult for the human mind. Discipline is not about doing more. It is about doing less, but inevitably. Eliminating unnecessary movements, reducing internal noise, closing emotional loops that consume energy without producing position. Most people live in a reaction, justification, exhaustion cycle. They react to stimuli. They justify their reactions through internal narratives. They exhaust themselves. Then they seek comfort or validation. This cycle is easy to maintain. The media feeds it. Culture normalizes it. Conversations reinforce it. Discipline breaks the cycle at the beginning, before reaction, not through emotional repression, but through deliberate delay. Emotion appears. It is observed, but it is not followed immediately. This delay creates space, and space creates options. Without space, there is no choice. There is only reflex. Reflexes can be exploited. Choices much harder. A disciplined person is not unpredictable in a chaotic sense. They are unpredictable to those who look for emotional triggers. Because the trigger no longer produces the expected effect, this shifts the effort of control onto the other person. It forces them to try harder, to expose more, to rush. In any power dynamic, the one who rushes loses, not immediately, but inevitably. Talent, being tied to expression, to rapid reaction, to intensity, creates the habit of rushing. When you are used to winning through speed, you begin to use it even when it is not necessary, even when it becomes a disadvantage. Discipline slows down deliberately, not because it cannot accelerate, but because it is not forced to. This difference is felt in conversations, in negotiations, in conflicts. The reactive person feels the need to fill silence, to respond, to defend themselves. The disciplined person can wait, and waiting shifts pressure. Pressure does not disappear, it transfers. When you do not react, the other person begins to explain themselves. When you do not rush, the other person begins to offer concessions. When you do not defend yourself, the other person begins to justify their attack. These behaviors are not conscious strategies. They are automatic reactions to the absence of expected feedback. Discipline exploits this automation without provoking it directly. It is important to understand that this form of power is not spectacular. It does not create memorable moments. It does not produce heroic stories. It produces slow, cumulative, almost invisible results. That is why it is underestimated. That is why it is left in the hands of those who have the patience to apply it. Those who seek validation cannot sustain discipline, because validation demands quick reaction, it demands signals, it demands confirmation. Discipline functions in the absence of these things. In fact, it functions better in their absence. A disciplined person does not derive their value from external feedback, not because they are immune to it, but because they do not consider it a primary indicator. The primary indicator is adherence to internal structure. That creates a source of stability that cannot be easily influenced from the outside. This stability is perceived as authority, not declared, felt. Real authority is not announced. It is inferred from behavior, from lack of reaction, from consistency, from the fact that you are not pulled in multiple directions by contradictory stimuli. People sense when they cannot move you easily, and they react differently. Without knowing exactly why, talent may impress once. Discipline rewrites expectations. There is a form of quiet that appears when you are no longer forced to respond immediately. It is not relaxation, it is clarity. The mind is no longer occupied with justifications, with explanations, with comparisons. It becomes functional. It observes more than it expresses. This quiet is often misinterpreted as emotional detachment. In reality, it is strategic detachment. Emotions exist, but they no longer lead. They are integrated into a broader system of decision. Those who lack this structure confuse intensity with depth. They speak a lot, feel a lot, react quickly, but they do not build position. They only consume energy. Discipline conserves energy. It directs it. It repeats it. Over time, this repetition creates a difference in psychological weight. Your presence begins to be felt differently, not because you impose something, but because you are not pushed easily, not pulled easily, not distracted easily. This weight changes the dynamic even without intention. People adjust, they speak differently, they approach differently, they calculate their reactions, because they sense that your reactions are not automatic. Talent does not produce this weight, because talent is associated with expression, with reaction, with emotional availability. Discipline produces functional opacity, not mystery, not secrecy, but the absence of exploitable signals. And in a world that functions on the exploitation of signals, this is a rare form of power. At this point, pressure no longer comes from the outside, it comes from the inside, because you begin to see how much of your life has been driven by reaction, how much of your behavior has been predictable, how easily you were read, manipulated, pushed. This realization is not comfortable. It is not meant to be. It is meant to remain. Self-control is often confused with self-mastery. The difference is essential. Self-control is a delayed reaction. Self-mastery is a structure that makes reaction irrelevant. Self-control demands constant effort. Self-mastery reduces the need for effort. One is energy-consuming, the other is conserving. Most people live in a regime of intermittent self-control. They restrain themselves for a period, then they give in. Then they blame themselves. Then they restart the cycle. This model is presented as normal, as human, and it is. But it is also exploitable. Because any system based on constant effort collapses under sufficient pressure. Self-mastery works differently. It is not based on endurance, but on architecture. It does not ask you to be strong in every moment. It asks you to be clear once, clear about what enters the system and what does not, clear about what triggers reactions and what is ignored, clear about what is negotiable and what is not. This clarity is rare because it is uncomfortable. It removes excuses. It removes ambiguity. It removes the space where the ego can hide. Once the structure is established, emotional reaction has nowhere to go. There is no longer any operational space for it. This is where real quiet appears, not the quiet of relaxation, but the quiet in which you are no longer pulled in opposite directions by contradictory impulses. Talent does not prepare you for this stage. On the contrary, talent reinforces the idea that you are the source of your decisions in every moment, that every situation requires a new response, that every context must be felt before being acted upon. This apparent flexibility is, in reality, a form of instability. Self-mastery reduces emotional flexibility in order to increase strategic stability. When your reactions are no longer at the mercy of external stimuli, you begin to notice something uncomfortable. Most urgencies are not real. Most conflicts are artificial. Most challenges are tests of reaction, not situations that require immediate action. People pressure you not because time is critical, but because they want to take control of the rhythm. Rhythm is power. Whoever controls your rhythm controls your decisions. When you are rushed, you accept more. When you are tense, you explain too much. When you are emotional, you give up position without realizing it. Self-mastery takes back the rhythm. It slows it down. It stabilizes it. It makes it predictable for you and frustrating for others. This frustration is not a goal. It is a side effect. People who cannot regulate themselves instinctively try to regulate others. Through pressure, through guilt, through dramatization, through urgency. When these tactics do not work, confusion and irritation appear. Not because you did something wrong, but because you did not play the expected role. Self-mastery pulls people out of their usual roles. At this point, you begin to see the difference between those who want what is good for you and those who want your reaction. Those who want what is good for you adapt to your rhythm. Those who want your reaction try to speed you up. This distinction is not moral. It is functional, and it becomes evident only when you no longer react automatically. Talent keeps you open, available, receptive. All of these are presented as virtues, but openness without structure is an invitation to interference. Self-mastery does not close you off. It filters you. It allows access only where there is no strategic cost. This filtering reduces noise, and along with the noise, a large part of the psychological fatigue you considered normal disappears. Not because life becomes easier, but because you no longer fight with yourself in every decision. When constant internal struggle no longer exists, a different weight appears in your presence. It is not intimidation. It is not declared dominance. It is stability. People sense when they cannot push you easily, when they cannot obtain a quick emotional response, when they have to adjust their behavior in order to interact with you. This adjustment is a form of tacit recognition. Self-mastery does not seek this recognition, but it produces it inevitably, because most people live in a continuous flow of reactions, and someone who does not enter that flow stands out without effort. At this point, talent becomes almost irrelevant, because the game is no longer about punctual performance. It is about positioning. about who controls the frame, about who decides what matters and what does not. Self-mastery moves the game from the visible arena into a deeper one, where fast reactions are a disadvantage. This is where the final rupture occurs between those who appear powerful and those who are. Those who appear powerful react well, speak well, impress. Those who are powerful do not offer enough material to be evaluated quickly, not because they hide, but because they are not pressured to expose themselves. This lack of internal pressure is rare, and precisely because of that, it is confused with indifference. In reality, it is a form of deep control, control over attention, control over time, control over energy. When you arrive here, you do not feel triumph, you do not feel enthusiasm, you feel a reduction. Fewer impulses, fewer explanations, fewer needs to clarify who you are. Not because you know exactly who you are, but because you no longer need to formulate it constantly. This reduction is the beginning of final stability, and it is not a comfortable ending. It is a quiet one. At this point, it is no longer about doing more, nor about becoming something specific. It is about what you no longer do, about the reactions that no longer appear, about the impulses that no longer reach the surface, about the noise that has been reduced enough that it no longer feels normal. Most people do not realize how much of their life is governed by reflex, not because they are unaware, but because the reflex is fast and immediately justified. Emotion appears, action follows, the story is built afterward. This order is rarely questioned. It is accepted as natural, human, inevitable. But inevitability is only a perception maintained by the absence of structure. When discipline has been installed deeply enough, emotional reaction does not disappear completely. It becomes, however, slow, weak, delayed. It appears after the decision has already been made, after the action has already been executed. Emotion is no longer the leader. It becomes a witness, and witnesses control nothing. This is where the circle closes. Talent, in its raw form, relies on rapid reaction, on emotional timing, on the ability to feel the moment. But the moment is unstable. The moment changes. The moment demands energy. Discipline does not require the right moment. It creates continuity regardless of the moment. Over time, this continuity produces something difficult to describe for those who have not lived it. A sense of inner weight, not oppressive, stable, as if nothing carries the urgency it once did, not because things no longer matter, but because they no longer demand immediate reaction. This is the difference between a life lived and a life administered. Those who react live their lives as a sequence of events that happen to them. Disciplined people administer their lives as a system that continues regardless of events. Emotions become temporary variations, not directions. This shift is often perceived from the outside as coldness, as distance, as lack of involvement. In reality, it is a shift in center of gravity. Involvement is no longer emotional, it is structural. It no longer comes from impulse, it comes from decision. When you no longer react to every stimulus, the world becomes smaller, not in the sense of limitation, but in the sense of clarity. Fewer things demand your attention, fewer voices seem relevant, fewer conflicts seem real, not because you have become superior, but because you have become selective. Selection is a quiet act of power. Talent does not teach you to select, it teaches you to respond, to express yourself, to participate. Discipline teaches you to refuse without explanation, to stay out of games that do not produce position, to let situations exhaust themselves when they do not deserve your intervention. This capacity not to intervene is one of the hardest things for the ego to tolerate, because the ego wants to be relevant, wants to be involved, wants to be recognized. Self-mastery reduces these needs to the point where they no longer dictate behavior. When you arrive here, there is no longer a desire to prove anything to anyone, not even to yourself, not because you have arrived somewhere, but because you have exited the comparison race. The comparison race is fueled by reaction. Without reaction, the race stops. This is one of the most uncomfortable realizations. How much of your ambition was, in fact, reaction to others? How much of your motivation was fear of falling behind? How much of your effort was justification, not construction? Discipline does not need justification. It exists because it has been installed. It functions because it is repeated. It does not ask for meaning. It produces results through simple continuity. At this point, there is no longer enthusiasm about the future, nor fear. The future becomes an extension of the present, not a promise, not a threat, just a continuation of the structure already in place. This lack of dramatism is disturbing for those who live on intensity. Because intensity demands reaction, it demands fluctuation, it demands emotion. When these things are absent, intensity has nothing left to cling to. And then the quiet appears. Not the quiet of happiness, not the quiet of satisfaction, but the quiet in which things are clear, in which emotional reaction seems primitive, in which impulses are seen for what they are, old signals, once useful, but unsuitable for long-term control. This quiet does not make you gentler. It makes you harder to move, because you are no longer pulled by stimuli, no longer pushed by pressures, no longer drawn by quick promises. You have become dense, stable, predictable to yourself, and opaque to others. Here, talent no longer has any central role. It may exist, it may be used, but it is no longer the foundation. The foundation is the disciplined mind, the mind that does not react immediately. The mind that does not ask for comfort, the mind that does not rush. This mind does not win quickly, but it wins surely. And you do not feel the need to call this victory, because victory implies an opponent, it implies struggle, it implies emotion. Here, there is nothing left to defeat, only to continue. And continuation, without noise, without haste, without reaction, is the final form of control, not as a goal, as a state.